You know, it's easy to look at the Bible and see a huge collection of different books, different stories, different laws. But what if I told you it's really telling one single overarching story? Today, that's what we're going to do. Trace that one grand narrative from the very beginning all the way to the end.
So, we're going to break this epic drama down into five main acts. It all starts with a perfect world that gets lost. Then we see a promise given to a chosen people, which leads to their struggles with kings and exile. After that, the promised savior finally arrives, and it all culminates in the ultimate sacrifice.
All right, Act 1. Let's set the scene. Our story begins in paradise, a perfect garden called Eden. But it's right here at the very start that a single choice is made that sets up the central conflict for, well, the entire rest of the story.
So the narrative kicks off with this incredible 6-day creation event. On day 1, there was light. Day 2, the sky and sea are separated. Day 3, we get dry land and all the plants. On day 4, the sun, moon, and stars are put in place. Then comes the animals, sea and air creatures on day 5. And finally, on day 6, we get the land animals and the pinnacle of it all, humanity. Adam and Eve, created in God's own image.
Now, life in this garden was basically perfect. Total freedom, with just one catch. One single rule that would become the first major turning point of this whole story.
And here it is, the pivot point. This one little question, this simple lie, it introduces doubt. And that doubt, it leads to disobedience. And that single act of disobedience shatters everything. It creates a separation between humanity and God that will drive the entire rest of the narrative.
Okay, so with humanity now lost and separated, the story shifts. It moves into the beginning of what is essentially a grand rescue plan. And it all starts with a single promise made to a single man.
This whole rescue mission kicks off with a man named Abraham. He's given a foundational promise. That promise then gets passed down through his descendants, like his grandson Jacob, whose sons become the famous 12 tribes of Israel. Then the story follows one of those sons, Joseph, down to Egypt, where the whole family ends up settling, growing into a huge nation, only to become slaves. And that brings us to the final key figure here, Moses, who's chosen to lead them all to freedom. And that freedom comes through a really dramatic, pivotal event, the Passover. This is the moment that finally breaks Pharaoh's will. It's the event that springs the Israelites from their centuries of bondage in Egypt. So, they're free. Now what? The whole nation gathers at the foot of Mount Sinai, and it's here that God makes a formal agreement or a covenant with them. He gives them a core set of laws to live by, the 10 Commandments. But you know, getting into that promised land wasn't a straight shot. The first generation that left Egypt, their lack of faith, meant they had to wander in the desert 40 years. 40 years, until an entirely new generation was finally ready to inherit the land that was promised to their ancestor Abraham centuries earlier. Right, so they're finally in the land, but now the story enters this long, cyclical struggle as Israel tries to govern itself and, more importantly, stay faithful to God. Pretty soon, the people decide they want a king to rule them. Their first one is Saul. He kind of looked the part, but he ends up disobeying God, and the kingdom is taken from him. He's followed by David, a shepherd boy who's described as a man after God's own heart. Now, David had his flaws, for sure, but he's promised an eternal dynasty and goes down in history as Israel's greatest king. The kingdom hits its absolute peak, its golden age, under David's son, Solomon. His wisdom was legendary, and he builds this magnificent temple in Jerusalem, which becomes the absolute center of Israel's identity and their worship. But this golden age, it just doesn't last. After Solomon, the kingdom tragically splits right in two. You have the northern kingdom, Israel, which is led by a string of evil kings and is eventually wiped out by Assyria. And in the south, you have Judah, which had a mix of good and bad kings, but they also fall into idolatry and are eventually conquered by Babylon, forcing everyone into exile. So after centuries of these prophetic promises, all the ups and downs, the narrative finally reaches its central turning points, the arrival of the one person this entire story has been building towards. And the entire story just pivots on this single miraculous birth. An angel appears to a young woman and announces that her son, Jesus, is going to be the heir to King David's throne, and that his kingdom will last forever. His public ministry is just defined by these incredible, miraculous acts, which the source presents as proof of his divine authority. I mean, he heals the sick, he casts out demons, he controls nature itself, multiplies food, and even raises people from the dead. And while his teachings on things like love and forgiveness were revolutionary, it was his more explosive claims that really caused a stir, saying he was the only way to God and calling out the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. That's what set him on a fatal collision course with the authorities. And this brings us to the final act. This is the climax of the whole story, where that central conflict of sin and separation that started all the way back in the Garden of Eden finally finds its ultimate resolution. The climax unfolds really, really fast. It starts with a final meal, the Last Supper. Right after that, he's betrayed and arrested. He's then put on trial and executed by crucifixion, the Roman method of punishment. But of course, that is not where this story ends. The true climax of the entire biblical narrative is the resurrection. 3 days after his death, the source states that Jesus rose from the grave. And this is presented as the ultimate proof that his sacrifice had conquered sin and death, finally fulfilling that grand rescue plan set in motion thousands of years before. So there you have it. From a perfect garden to an empty tomb, we see this one grand, overarching story of redemption, which really just leaves us with a final question to think about. What's the biggest takeaway from this incredible 4,000-year journey?